All right, welcome to the Elimination of Prejudice Foundation's March webinar featuring Gloria Steinem. We want to thank our sponsor, Velocity Advisory Group, for making this possible. Audience members, please ask questions at any time by using the chat function. This is an open dialogue and we want to hear your questions. Today's moderator is Heather Sturenka. Heather is a certified diversity professional and a member of the Elimination of Prejudice Board. Let me turn this over to Heather. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Very excited to be here. Do a quick introduction of Gloria. She's a social activist, organizer, nationally recognized leader of the feminist movement from the 60s and 70s and beyond, a writer, journalist, leading voice for women's rights, co-founded many organizations, including the National Women's Political Caucus and the Ms. Foundation for Women. In 2013, she was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom by President Obama. And she's currently an author, lecturer, and media spokeswoman on issues of equality. And we are so lucky and honored to have her with us today. Gloria, welcome to the Elimination of Prejudice Foundation.
Thank you, and I'm so grateful for that title of a foundation. That's wonderful. I'm just worried about living up to my introduction.
That's not going to be a problem. For me, growing up, your name has always been synonymous with the feminist movement, with women's rights. And I recognize that I was talking to my sons that are in their 20s and my daughter who's 16, and there may be some younger generations who are not aware of the work that has been done to get us where we are today. And that's one of the reasons I feel it is so important to remind us all of how much you and women like you and women before you and men have done to get us to where we are today. So reflecting on where we were in the 60s and 70s when you started and today, what do you think the biggest issues were then compared to what we're facing today?
You know, they were the same in many ways. That is, economic equality, equality in marriage, equal child rearing, that is, men raising children as much as women raise children, which you can see hasn't yet happened. They were the same. They were just in an earlier stage, and they were often viewed as quite impossible and crazy because they were being phrased for the first time. Of course, there had been a huge first wave for the vote and against slavery, but the second wave was new enough in the 60s and 70s. So it was sometimes regarded as being against nature.
Oh, wow. Talking about, in your intro, I mentioned that you had co-founded Ms. Magazine or founded Ms. Magazine. And it was, from what I read, an important platform for the movement and having that media available for the movement. Today, the social media, it's completely different. It's good and bad. I wondered if you could share some thoughts on the importance of a platform and how we're using social media.
Well, Ms. Magazine is still online, you know, so you can find it.
Yes.
And it is still the only national magazine that's totally devoted to the equality of women around the world. But of course, now we both benefit from and in a way suffer from multitudinous sources. And sometimes I wish there were a big fact checker in the sky somewhere, because we can also be subject to factoids and misconceptions because there are so many sources. But I do think that the advantage of being able to connect with each other in this technological way is huge and crucial. The remaining thing that worries me is that there are big parts of the world that don't have electricity, much less the internet. And I worry about us getting too divided. So we need to think about that. We need a big satellite in the sky that can connect everyone.
That would be wonderful. And I agree. And even within this country, there are there's inequality in who has access to broadband, who has access to the information that's out there. If we think about that, how have you seen online and social media change maybe the way we talk about gender, about equity, about equality? Has there been changes to the actual way we talk about it?
Yes, I think there has been a change in adjectives. That is, we are way less likely probably to precede someone with an adjective that describes or limits that person's identity. And we're way more likely to be able to raise issues. But the media has always been a bit behind the movement. Actually, in the spirit of show and tell here, I brought an issue of Life magazine, which was a century of remarkable women.
Wow.
And there were only white women in the section called Women for Women from Susan B. Anthony forward.
Wow.
And Black women and women of color were in specific other areas that had to do with issues, but not with gender. I mean, in a way, they weren't included as women. So that has always been a problem with the media. In my own experience as a speaker, we tried to address it by always speaking together. That is, I would always be speaking with Florence Kennedy. I hope people look up her name. Wonderful woman. Dorothy Pittman Hughes, Margaret Sloan. We would be speaking in white and black pairs, you might say, so that we made a point about the movement, and also we got more diverse audiences together than any one of us would have got separately. And I still think that's a good tactic, and including Latinas, when we appear together, we make a point.
I agree. When I do training and facilitating, it's very powerful for me to work with a woman of color, whether it's a Latinx woman or a Black woman, or even someone from the LGBTQ community. So when you work together, there's power in that connection. And still, I know that the women's movement has faced criticism because there's been more, the benefits of the work that's been done haven't been distributed equally. And I know that that's something that we're still continuing as a white woman. It's something that is really important for me to address that and speak to it.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're living in a racist country, a racially divided country. Mm-hmm. And it was never more obvious than under Trump, in a way, because the third of the country that voted for Trump was overwhelmingly white and male. And some women too, but the women were generally dependent on the incomes of white men. See what I mean? So it still is present, but it's not present in the movement. It's something that the movement is trying to, well, I mean, we probably reflect it in some ways, but at the same time, we've always been trying to overcome it by, sometimes we have a veritable chorus line of speakers of,
Yes.
of different women, right?
Right. Thinking about race and gender, I wonder sometimes if we can separate them, because I wonder if I should identify as a white woman first, or white first and then a woman, or a woman and then white. There's power in each, there's opportunities in each, but what are your thoughts on how they come together? Can we ever truly be one?
No, I think we probably respond to the immediacy of the situation we're in, plus our own experience. I mean, I identify as a woman. I don't identify as a white woman. but I recognize white privilege,
Mhm.
you know, so it also just depends on the situation. And it's not peculiar to us, you know, the other big democracy in which I've lived for long periods of time, for a couple of years, is India. And, you know, there is this, you know, the same kind of adjectival problems plus caste divisions. So, you know, we are all trying, I think, to say, look, we arrive in this world as an infant, a unique human being who could never have happened before and could never happen again. And that is what's important. And we're trying to escape any adjectives that restrict us.
I heard you, I've seen you talk about, when you talk about the way we work together, use the term linked, not ranked. I wonder if you could explain, what does that mean when you're talking in this? Because I think we're getting to that with what you and I are speaking about now.
Well, it was the linked, not ranked. I actually made them into bracelets.
Yes.
That said,
Mine are in the being shipped right now.
because it was the shortest way I could come up with to say what I believe we are and what our goal is, that human beings are linked like this, not ranked like this. And that, you know, accounts for many, many different situations. And it also allows us to be a circle, which is a much more egalitarian structure than a pyramid or, you know, any of the others. And it's companionable, you know, it's kind of intimate. And, you know, we as human beings need each other's companionship.
Absolutely. There's power in circles, something about going back to when humans first showed up on the planet, that we would sit in circles around the fire, that we keep these circles, and that symbolism carries through in that, what you talked about, linked and connected.
Yes, and it's probably, you know, wherever we are, it's kind of interesting to think of history as vertical, not just horizontal, right? So when human beings started on this, you know, continent where we are, it's interesting to think of what came before on the very spot on which we are standing. And since what we now call Native Americans, for no real right,
Right.
they which were the earlier cultures here and are still here, there was more consciousness of that, and leadership included women as well as men. Even if the, what in English might be called the chief, was a male, he was chosen by the Council of Grandmothers. So, you know, it was much more connected.
So speaking of Indigenous, Native American, it leads me to think about the land that we inhabit, and Earth Day is coming up in April. There's been a lot of talk around the environmental movement and the connections that it has with feminism and women's movement and race and eliminating racism. Again, a lot of people may not see them as linked, but I really do feel that there are connections there that we can take advantage of, maybe do better.
Yes, of course. I mean, the idea of masculine is through no fault of many men anyway, but still connected with hierarchy and conquering the military, the corporate ladder, and so on. So it's very helpful to get out of that ranking and into linking and understanding how little the adjectives actually matter. I mean, you know, it's infinitesimal.
You mentioned earlier the previous president, and we are facing a lot of challenges today in the form of voter suppression, threats to women's reproductive rights in the Congress, in the Supreme Court. And as a mother of young men in their 20s, it worries me that young people are often the least likely to vote because they feel they don't have an impact. What would you say to young people?
Well, I guess I would say if you don't vote, you don't exist. I mean, in many political ways. And that there's a kind of a conspiracy to discourage you from voting. So perhaps it would help to have a familial tradition, so that when the adults went to vote, they took children with them. So they, even before they are able to vote, so that they got this feeling that this is a absolutely crucial way of contributing to the community and having a voice. Otherwise, we really don't exist.
Going along with that, what I've also heard people say is these issues are so big, I can't have an impact. I don't know where to start. What advice would you give to somebody who wants to take action but isn't clear on where to begin?
Well, I find it helpful to think of change as a tree. And trees do not grow from the top down. No, they grow from the bottom up, right? That plus the fact that if we don't act and vote and so on, we don't exist, is I think very helpful. We may still be further helped by kind of community, so that we organize our neighbors, we talk to our postman, about voting, we just, but there is obviously no one in this country who's not affected by the issues that we are voting on. And we can see where voter suppression movements come from. And they, come from groups that are trying to stay in control.
So I'm thinking back to the work that you've done for decades. What happened? Could you talk about a time that there was a roadblock or a setback, maybe that I know there have been probably several, but that you've overcome, but can you give us an example of something?
Well, because I live in New York, I think again of Trump, because he comes from New York.
Yeah.
So even though we were 95% voting against him in New York, somehow he got elected by the rest of the country. And it took a while to overcome this obstacle to democracy. So we can do it. We just need to use our voices, to organize wherever we are, to speak, including online now, to our network and alert them to deadlines or to particular situations which we can impact. And I guess I would just like to emphasize that it's fun. It is not a burden, it's fun. So I don't know where that's coming from.
I don't know.
Okay. Sorry.
That's all right. I was afraid it was me. No, but I think what you said, you ended with it. It's actually fun. And a lot of people, maybe not so many, but people are thinking it's not fun and it's drudgery, but the getting together, making connections, working for something that's important is fun.
Yes, and we are communal animals. There's a reason why solitary confinement is the worst punishment all over the world, because we are communal animals. We need each other. It produces oxytocin in our brains, which allows us to empathize with each other. It's a pleasure and it's a necessity.
I've also seen you write about having a sense of humor and how important that can be.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it turns out that I think it's fair to say that laughter is the only emotion that cannot be compelled. You can obviously make someone afraid. You can even make somebody believe they're in love if they're dependent for long enough. but you can't make them laugh unless they really so. And in many Native nations, there is a spirit of laughter who has no gender. But the idea is literally that laughter breaks into the unknown. And if you can't laugh, you can't pray.
Wow. I just want to take a minute to reflect on if you can't laugh, you can't pray.
It's very self-defeating, I think, in religious institutions that don't allow you to talk and laugh, while you're sitting there listening to, right.
It opens up, almost like laughter opens up something in you that allows the spirit to come to you. So.
Because it is free. I mean, you cannot compel someone to laugh, right?
So if you could talk to your 25-year-old self, what are some pieces of advice you would have given yourself back then, if we had a time machine?
Yeah, that's kind of hard. I guess the first thing I would say is it's going to be all right. General way, right? And then there would be specific things that weren't all right, but became all right for me. For instance, I've never had a job in my entire life. I've never worked for anyone else. I mean, we had a magazine, but we did that ourselves. And I was a freelance writer. And so I think I inherited this from my father, who was always running a summer resort or buying and selling antiques from his car or something. But the pressure to think is that when I graduated from college, that I was supposed to have a job, that I was supposed to get married, that I was supposed to do all the conventional things was very great. So I would try to comfort myself and lessen that pressure.
I think many of us get caught up in the shoulds, what I should be doing, and it gets in our way of moving forward because if it doesn't match what's in our head.
No, but we could do the coulds.
Yes.
Because the coulds count, possibilities.
Replace the shoulds with the coulds. Okay. So I'm wondering if we have any questions from the audience that people would like to share. Gary, do you have any questions?
Or answers.
Yes, we could also take answers, yes.
Right.
So far we don't, but please, from our, we just had one that came in here, so.
Okay.
Do you want to read it, Heather?
Sure. Okay, right. It's from Jeremy. As an ally, we seem to have made so much progress with the Me Too movement, a higher degree of men in power being held accountable, women in higher positions of responsibility in the C-suite, but at the same time, it seems there's so much noise about returning to simpler times. Seemingly, this is a coded phrase for taking advances and taking rights away. So are we getting better as a culture, or? Yeah.
Well, it depends on where we are. I mean, I have not been confronted with anybody telling me we should return to simpler times, because I'm old enough to remember they weren't simpler. I mean, there's nothing to do. I mean, just because they were more ordered by race and gender and so on, certainly did not make them simpler, made them way, way more complicated. I think one thing we have not given its due is men raising children, infants and little children, as much as women do, because we've been too focused on integrating women into that which is considered superior, which is the workforce and politics and so on, and not in the home and in life itself, integrating men and boys into child rearing. And taking care of children is how we develop patience and empathy. We had a program here once in which the little boys, like 8 years old, 9 years old, from a childcare center went once a week to take care of babies. And at first the little boys said, oh, they're gross, you have to diaper them and so on.
Right.
But then they discovered babies were interesting. So they renamed the program Oh Boy Babies, because that's what the little boys said, every week, oh boy babies, when they went to the childcare center.
Wow.
So, male human beings do not have to wait until they are fathers, to connect with children, and they don't have to be in families where there are people younger than them. We can integrate all society in this way.
Right. Take away some of the stigma that whatever men feel.
Yes, and once also I remember in a Native American situation where it was said that the very old and the very young have the most in common because they're the closest to the unknown.
Wow.
That's deep, right?
That is deep. Yes. Wow. Yes. Part of Jeremy's question that I don't think we talked about was the Me Too movement.
Mhm.
It seemed to have a lot of steam. It seemed to there were definitely progress made. What are your thoughts about the Me Too movement?
The Me Too movement is part of women's ability to say what is happening to them instead of just feeling it was their fault or that it was their shame or that they can't do anything about it. So, I mean, if we don't have say-so over our own physical selves, men and women, we're not living in a democracy. So if women can be touched and sexually assaulted and, with any kind of impunity or regularity, then it takes away the very roots of democracy.
Right. And okay. Yeah. I'm still processing that they're closer to the unknown. That's what I'm still thinking about. If you were going to talk to young people about doing this kind of work or getting involved, what kind of qualities do you think they should have? What would set them up for success?
Anything, whoever they are, authentically. They don't have to be somebody else. So if I'm talking to young people, hopefully I'm spending more time listening than talking, because they have experiences I don't have. They have aspirations that are unique to them. And once again, there's a very simple democracy that comes from an equality of talking and listening.
I've often heard people say this, that listen and silent have the same letters to remind you to listen. You need to be silent for at least a time. Trying to think of what else is there anything else that you'd like to share with us that I haven't asked you about?
Oh, I'm sure there's tons. But I just want to be encouraging in any way I can to the unique individuals who are listening and watching, and we can't know each other's situation, but we are a community here, even online. And I hope that, well, here I'll make a deal with our listeners that I used to do in meetings and lectures and so on. If you promise me, each of you, that you will do at least one outrageous thing in the cause of simple justice in the next 24 hours, I promise you that I will do one outrageous thing too. And that means by the day after that, the world will be better.
Wow. We could have 20 people doing outrageous things in the cause of justice. It would be powerful, very powerful. You mentioned I've been to your website, and what I liked about it is you list not only what you do, but organizations that you partner with and how important it is. So to me, anywhere I wanted to make a difference or get involved, there were some opportunities there. Can you talk about some of the organizations you partner with and would recommend?
Well, right now, we're concerned with the revolutionary possibility of making women part of the Constitution. So the ERA coalition, I mean, we've spent 50 years, and I remember them all, just trying to get women into the US Constitution. We're the only democracy in the world that doesn't have women in the Constitution. So if you go online and find the ERA coalition, you can discover how to be active. You can discover what position your members of Congress has, and what position your state has in supporting. That's something very basic and very doable.
Would that count as our outrageous act, or?
Well, I don't know if it's outrageous. When I'm in meetings, I mean, I love that, women and men come up with very, distinct, outrageous acts. I remember one woman getting up and saying, yes, she said her outrageous act was to say to her husband, pick it up yourself. I don't know quite what she meant by that.
Right. It could be anything, yeah.
Yeah, or just, sharing and just if you're perennially serving other people in some way, whether you're a male or a female, just cutting it out so they learn to serve themselves.
So making people be accountable and giving them the gift of being accountable for themselves.
And also, I mean, it applies to almost everything. I mean, if we're sitting with a group of people and the group is all white or otherwise doesn't look anything like the country, we can kind of point out that we're being deprived. The group is being deprived. There's something wrong with a group that doesn't look like the people they're making decisions for. Yeah.
I think sometimes we spend so much time looking at who's in the room that we don't spend time thinking about who should be in the room. Who isn't here that needs to be here to represent the country, to represent different parts of who we are as people. One comment from one of the guests, from Nikki. She talks about, I want to be bold and courageous, but it's so hard to stay encouraged when the pace of change seems to happen so slowly. What would you recommend? How have you stayed encouraged?
Well, I think mostly I've stayed encouraged by having people around me, friends, colleagues, whoever, who share the hopes, because I think since we are communal animals, as I was saying, it's when we get isolated that we feel despair. I don't know what the questioner's situation is, but I think making sure she has companionship is number one. And also, as I was saying before, don't feel that change comes from the top. It doesn't. It is like a tree. So the smallest thing that you do that creates more equality will have big repercussions as it proceeds.
Yes, thank you. I mentioned that that the Elimination of Prejudice Foundation was created by Pi Lambda Phi fraternity. And so I'm assuming that we have young men on this call. Is there anything specific you would say to young men about the work?
Mhm.
I mean, we talked a little bit about parenting and caring for children. Is there anything in addition?
Well, I think because in a hierarchical sense, even if it's not individually true for people, there's a notion that white people are more privileged than people of color, that men are more privileged than women, and so on. And we forget that privilege can be another word for a prison. I mean, they both start with P. So, you know, and sometimes it's in forms of expression. You know, we once did a record called "Free to Be You and Me," which maybe some people listening grew up on. And,
Yeah.
and Rosie Greer, who was this huge, enormous, you know, very
Pittsburgh
famous
Steelers, right?
football player, yeah,
Mhm.
sang a song called "It's All Right to Cry." Right, right.
So,
Yeah, and that kind of said it all.
so looking at stereotypes and finding a way to be outrageous and do something that doesn't fall into that. Another question, you talked about the importance of the that we're linked. How important is it, do you think, that we see women in leadership positions? For example, Kamala Harris is the first woman to hold that office, to hold the office of vice president.
Mhm.
How critically important is that? And a woman of color.
No, it is very important, because if we never see anybody who looks like us in some position of power, it's way more difficult to imagine ourselves into it. And you know, that has ever been true. So there are little girls looking at Kamala and understanding that they could be there and that they could be president, which of course we have never had a woman president. So, you know, we're still way behind many other democracies.
Definitely. Well, you've given us so many pearls of wisdom, that the tree grows from the roots, that the oldest and the youngest are most connected to the unknown. What else? Is there anything else you'd like to leave us with?
Oh, well, I think there's a certain immediacy to saying, when you get up tomorrow morning, do one thing, however big or small, that you spontaneously want to do on your own, for your own dignity, equality, amusement, you know, whatever it may be, that you have felt restricted from doing. And if you do that tomorrow, I guarantee that the day after tomorrow will be different and better.
I think we've all agreed to do something outrageous, and I think we can make that pledge for you. One other question. The pay equity is one of the things that is still, we've made progress, but it's still out there. But the women's soccer team in the US just had some success. Again, what does that say? Is that something that's going to help us move forward, or what are your
Yes,
thoughts?
definitely. I mean, women in sports, women and men in sports, are seen by many, identified with by millions, and the idea that women's sports, even though they had as many viewers, say for tennis or, you know, soccer or whatever it was, were and still are in many cases paid way less than men in sports. And, there have been many important women crusaders, some men and their support who have pointed that out. And it really is crucial, because, people love to watch both. It's not as if there isn't a firm economic base. I mean, I have a soccer ball that the women's soccer team gave me in the next room with all their names on it. So I, who am a complete non-sports person, am also converted.
It's more than just a soccer ball, I think, that piece that you have.
Yes, and there's something, I mean, when you see women playing sports, girls and women learn or just absorb the idea that our bodies are not ornaments, they are instruments. And that is crucial because it makes you move, it helps you move from thinking your identity depends on how you look or on externals to understanding that it's the internal that's important.
I think that's all that I have for you today, unless anyone's got any other questions.
Or answers, don't forget.
Answers, right? That's right. If there are any answers for us,
Right.
or
Right.
if you'd like to put into the chat what your outrageous act will be for tomorrow. I do want to take a minute to again thank the Velocity Advisory Group for sponsoring this. It's just been very powerful and very good for the work that we can amplify what you do and encourage people to take up the charge.
Yes, and I want to thank also the coiners of the phrase elimination of prejudice, because that is a kind of global way of putting it so that we don't feel individually blamed, but we feel communally motivated.
Yes. Yeah, it's not about, blame doesn't get us anywhere. It holds us in place. So the more we can encourage people, the better. So thank you so much for your time. And I'm gonna
thank you so much. And I'm sorry that we aren't all in the same room so that we can experience the empathy and oxytocin that we
yes.
But I'm thankful for this contact via technology. Who knows, we might meet sometime. So
sure. Yeah, I'll meet you in Toledo if you'd like. So not too far. Yeah. And I'll hand it back to Gary.
All right. Well, thank you both. And thank you, Gloria, for being a part of this and sharing your, wisdom and, about helping us eliminate prejudice.
No, well, thank you for that phrase. Thank you.
And Heather, thank you. So if anybody likes, please visit our website at Eliminate Prejudice. And, this will be recorded and then shared so that we can continue, sharing these words of wisdom. Thank you and have a good evening, everybody.
No, thank you. Thank you. Thank you.